Jacob was visibly upset with his mother and sister's behavior. We sat down and discussed everything thoroughly. It was evident that his mother had overstepped her boundaries, and Jacob felt guilty for not setting firmer boundaries earlier. We decided that it was time for him to have a serious conversation with his mother and sister about their behavior and their expectations. The next day, Jacob called his mother and firmly explained that their demand for us to give up our house was completely unreasonable, and that it would never happen. He made it clear that while he loved his family, he would not allow them to disrupt our lives or our marriage. He also told his mother that her constant favoritism and enabling of his sister's poor decisions were not helping anyone, especially not his sister. Jacob then called his sister and reiterated the same points, making it clear that she and her husband needed to take responsibility for their own lives and that we would not be bailing them out. He emphasized that we were willing to support them emotionally but not financially, and certainly not at the expense of our own home and well-being. Both calls were difficult, and there were a lot of tears and shouting from his mother and sister. They accused me of turning Jacob against them, but he stood firm, telling them that these were his decisions, and that they needed to respect our boundaries. After the calls, Jacob and I felt a sense of relief. It was a tough step, but we knew it was necessary for our mental health and the health of our marriage. We also agreed to seek counseling to help navigate these family dynamics, and to ensure we were both on the same page moving forward. Over the next few weeks, the tension eased. Jacob's father reached out to us, expressing his understanding and support. He apologized for the behavior of his wife and daughter and assured us that he would do his best to manage the situation from his end. Our marriage grew stronger from this experience. We learned the importance of setting boundaries and communicating openly with each other. While Jacob's relationship with his mother and sister remained strained, he knew it was for the best until they could learn to respect our boundaries and decisions. Ultimately, standing up for ourselves was a pivotal moment in our marriage. We realized that we could face any challenge as long as we were united and supportive of each other. This experience taught us the value of mutual respect, communication, and the importance of prioritizing our own well-being and happiness. Husband finally cut off his toxic mom and sis when they had the audacity to demand we give up our dream house for my jobless Sil, her deadbeat gaming addict husband, and their 6 kids. My in-laws have a very toxic relationship with my husband, and it is starting to affect my life. You see, while growing up, my husband used to be the favorite golden child, and Mill was extremely close to him. Jacob has told me that because his dad used to be quite busy with work, his mother and he spent a lot of time together. But I have noticed that his sister Sarah isn't treated the same by my Mill. Although I am sure that Mill loves both her children, I have noticed time and time again that she favors my husband more. I am sure Sil must have felt that growing up, which is why my husband has always tried to fill the role by being a good older brother to her, and always being there for her. But the thing is that both Sil and Mill would sometimes behave so absurdly that it crossed the line. For example, when we first started dating, Jacob, who was still just a fresh college graduate at that time, and my in-laws, including Sarah, used to live in the same house. My in-laws had given my husband an entirely different floor so he could have his own privacy and invite whoever he wanted. This is why he would sometimes invite me over to his place to spend the night with him. However, on several occasions during the morning, Sil would barge into our room while we were sleeping without knocking. As you can imagine, sometimes we were not even properly dressed, but she would act like it was completely normal and start talking to Jacob about very random things. This was extremely weird for me as I was uncomfortable with her seeing me in my lingerie. Before anyone points out, I completely understand that Jacob lived with his family at that time, so I should have expected this. But is knocking on the door before you enter a room really too much to ask for? I guess sometimes siblings can be very close, but she and I didn't know each other that well when Jacob and I first started dating. Hence I found it extremely disrespectful. So naturally I talked to Jacob about it and told him that I wouldn't be coming over unless he installed a lock on his door. He agreed, but as you can imagine, Sil, who tried to barge into the room the next morning unsuccessfully, started yelling at us about why we had the door locked. She started jiggling the door and banging on it, asking her brother to let her in. Jacob finally let her in, and she stormed into the room, questioning why he had installed the lock in the first place. When she noticed me, she pointed at me and started yelling at him, if it was because of this skank. I was shocked to hear how rude and disrespectful she sounded. Jacob told her that it was him who wanted to install the door lock, but Sil wasn't convinced. She angrily told him that they were siblings, and that they shouldn't have any secrets between them. Jacob told her that he didn't have any secrets, and that he had installed the lock so that she wouldn't barge in while he and I were sleeping, as it was really disturbing. Hearing this, Sil angrily flipped her head towards me and yelled that this was all my fault and that I was coming in between her and her brother. This all seemed to be a bit too much for me since I am very non-confrontational, so I excused myself to go to the washroom. I could hear her continuing to yell and Jacob trying to pacify her. When she was finally gone, he came in to comfort me. He was apologetic for her behavior and assured me that he would talk to her again so she would apologize to me as well. The next weekend, when I came over, she apologized to me and gave me a very pathetic excuse that she needed to talk to Jacob very urgently about something. Hence she thought it would be okay for her to come in. Jacob firmly asked her not to disturb us again, and she nodded meekly. Although this issue was solved, this wasn't her only weird behavior towards Jacob. If Jacob and I would disagree on something, even on small things like movies, and if Sil was around, she would start telling him how he should date someone who had similar tastes like him, and that we were clearly wrong for each other. Jacob would shoot her a disapproving look, but she would just smirk. Another incident would be where she would ask me uncomfortable questions about my past, trying to dig into my life. Jacob and I had been honest about each other's past from the very beginning, but I didn't feel comfortable sharing it with his sister. But regardless of my feelings, she would ask me uncomfortable questions like, "Why did your ex break up with you? Were you not good enough for him?" Or say comments like, "My brother's past girlfriend was so much prettier than you." All of these questions and comments would be whenever she and I were left alone. I slowly started to suspect that she was trying to play this game with me and put me down. Initially, I kept my mouth shut, but over the days when it continued, one day I had just enough. I replied back to her taunt, saying how I liked my ex-boyfriend's family more than Jacob's family, since my ex-boyfriend didn't have nosy, overbearing family members. Sil looked surprised at my reaction, and this seemed to shut her up for a while. What I had told her was basically true, even though she did have a weird relationship with my husband. Mill was no better than her. When I first came into his life, my Mill would ignore me, but once she realized that Jacob and I were getting serious, she started behaving like I was trying to steal her son away from her. She would purposefully ignore me at dinner or during family functions and act like I didn't exist. Jacob sometimes noticed this and would try to talk to her about it, but she never changed. Mill once even called me stuck up and spoiled just because my parents sent me to a private school and she was a public school teacher. I even know she tried to talk Jacob out of marrying me and told him to keep looking for a better partner than me. Fortunately, my husband didn't care about her opinion and proposed to me anyway. When Mill and Sil found out that he had proposed, they freaked out. Both of them called to tell me that perhaps this was a bad decision and, since Jacob wouldn't listen to them, I should end the relationship and give him back the ring. I found it very weird and refused, telling them that they were crossing a line by asking me to do something like this when I loved Jacob and wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. When they realized that they couldn't convince me, Mill changed her tune and begrudgingly told me that I should strive to be the best wife for him and take care of him the way that she had taken care of him all these years. I was a bit offended, but I tried not to take more offense to her words. Sarah, on the other hand, told me that I was clearly just a gold digger and that her brother deserved someone much more of his status. She threatened that she would make sure to expose me before our marriage so that Jacob would never marry me. After this conversation, I immediately talked to Jacob about everything, and he was taken aback at how rude they were towards me. He fought with them over this, but both Mill and Sil stuck to their tune that I wasn't good enough for him. He told me to ignore them, and that he loved me regardless of what they thought. Although his words were comforting, I did feel bad that his own family wouldn't accept me. Jacob and I had already decided to pay for our own wedding, so when Mill offered to pay for half of our expenses, we declined graciously, with Jacob telling her how hard we had worked to save money, just for this occasion. Instead of being happy for us, this made her even more upset, and she started to tell Jacob how sad she was that he didn't need her anymore. But Jacob's dad seemed very proud of us. His dad, unlike his sister and mother, was quite cool-headed and never had a problem with our relationship. Since Mill continued to complain to Jacob, we compromised by telling her that we would love it if she wanted to organize the rehearsal dinner for us. She agreed, and we appreciated the gesture. However, as the wedding approached, things took an unexpected turn. The first incident was when Sil invited herself to have dinner with us, telling Jacob how much she missed him. By this time, Jacob and I were living on our own after our engagement, so we thought she genuinely wanted to spend time with her brother, so we agreed. Jacob asked me clearly if I was okay with having dinner with her, and I begrudgingly agreed as I didn't want to be rude to my Sil, who was soon going to be my family. While we were having a good meal, Sil, seemingly out of the blue, started talking about how she absolutely detested cheating partners and how cheaters were nothing but useless pieces of shit. We looked at her curiously, thinking where she was going with this, when Sil looked me square in the face and asked me how it felt to be a useless piece of shit. My brows furrowed in confusion, and then Sil began to yell, accusing me of having an affair with my co-worker, Zach. Jacob asked her what she meant by that, and Sil triumphantly began pulling out pictures of me and one of my co-workers, waving them around and insisting that she had caught me red-handed.